Hello and welcome everyone to my Cold Conversion Animate Weapon Guide. The build features Animate Weapon, a temporary minion with a long duration that can be summoned from lingering blades on the ground that we can create with Ethereal Knives and Bladefall later on. While leveling, at least early on, we're going to clear most packs with our permanent minions and summon skeletons linked to Infernal Legion. This is because it takes time to animate all the weapons and they disappear on loading screens, which there are quite a lot of in the campaign. This changes after Act 4 when we get access to Unleash support, which allows us to summon 4 animate weapons at once. Of course, all of this is reflected in the skill composition for the early acts, which I added in the skills section, and after Act 5 it pretty much stays the same for the remainder of the campaign. In addition to that, I also added the Atlas passive tree progression. It is pretty standard, which is why I don't want to go into any more details in the video, but you can of course check it out if you're not sure how to do it. I've also made a leveling showcase of a similar build, namely Poison Animate Weapon, some time ago, and I'm going to leave the link to that video in the comments below, just in case you want to know how it actually looks like. For the League starter, we're looking at gear worth 1 divine or less, just like the gear featured in my League start video that I published recently. We're going to go with a convoking wand that we're rolling with a deafening essence of fear and craft the minion attack and cast speed modifier on it. For shield, we're going with Daresso's Courage, which gives us elemental resistances and helps us get spell block, which is kind of hard to get for us early on because we can't afford Tempest Shield just yet. For the helmet, we're going with Skullhead, which gives us elemental resistances and our minions 25% chance to block attack and spell damage, while also giving them 10% life recovery on block. And this, in combination with Bone Offering and Decay Ward, will help you transition into red maps without having to worry about your minions constantly dying. The aforementioned Decay Ward is a notable that functions similar to Skullhead in the sense that it gives our minions a chance to block attack and spell damage and life recovery on block, just slightly worse. And since Sapphire, Verdant and Teal oils are cheap, it should be super affordable even on League start. For our chest, we're going with a corrupted 6 link. In general, for our rares, we're looking for maximum life and elemental resistances, and of course, things like movement speed on the boots. For jewelry, we would like to have a free suffix, so we can craft on the elemental resistance, minion elemental resistance, double modifier, which helps both us and our minions top off our resistances. And for the gloves, we're getting Grip of the Council, which gives us stats and our minions cold resistance and physical damage as extra cold damage, which is especially powerful in this build because we're actually scaling the cold damage. For flasks, we're looking at a life flask that removes bleeding and corrupted blood, Rumi's Concoction as soon as we can afford it. Before that, just get yourself a generic granite flask. We want to have a Quicksilver flask with additional movement speed, a Quartz flask with increased armor to get access to phasing, which helps a lot while mapping, and an Amethyst flask to increase our chaos resistance. For our Ghastly Eye jewels, we're looking at flat added, cold, and physical damage. For the gear progression, we want to get ourselves the Ancient Skull, which gives our minions additional damage at the cost of them taking 20% of their maximum life as chaos damage per second, which requires us to invest into the minion chaos resistance modifiers. Without that, the damage is not sustainable. We also want to get ourselves a Skin of the Lords, which gives the socketed gems +2 levels and us 100% increased global defenses. You have to make sure to get one with the right color combination though, because the sockets cannot be modified by any means. It also allocates a keystone, and you have to make sure that the keystone doesn't brick your build. For example, something like Chaos Inoculation, because this would reduce our hit pool way too much, at least early on. Other noteworthy examples are Vaal Pact, which disables life regen, Blood Magic, which removes our mana, the Agnostic, because it reduces our energy shield to 0 and will constantly drain our mana when we take damage, just like Mind Over Matter. And for similar reasons, we also don't want to get Eldritch Battery, because, at least for defensive purposes, this reduces our energy shield to 0 as well. For our gloves, we want the Triad Grip in a 3 green, 1 red setup. And while this does not convert all the physical damage that minions dealing to cold damage, it is still damage optimal, because most of the green skill gems we're using are offensive auras, and we want to link those offensive auras to generosity support. So going with a 3 green, 1 red setup that allows us to do that is better than getting 4 green sockets, and thus 100% fist to cold conversion. Getting the right colors is a bit tricky. The easiest way is via the 3 socket craft. So what you have to do is put your Triad Grip in the crafting bench and craft 3 sockets if it doesn't already have exactly 3 sockets, followed by crafting 3 green sockets and then 4 sockets. And the color of the new socket is most likely going to be one that is native to the base, in this case red or blue. In case you don't get the color of the socket that you want, you can go back, craft 3 sockets again, which will retain the color of the initial 3 sockets, so 3 greens in our case. And you can then craft 4 sockets again, hopefully giving you the color that you want. Now, in theory, this can also be used to introduce a non-native color. It is, however, going to take a lot more tries on average. For our AG, we want Relentless Fury for the Culling Strike, Leercast for the increased damage, Wake of Destruction, so it can drop Shocking Ground, a pair of Hunter-influenced gloves to intimidate enemies on hit, Xandathis' Cassock that chaos caps our guardians even before we start putting points into minion chaos resistance, and allows it to create consecrated ground on block. Now this in itself would already be powerful, but it's made even better when combined with Broken Faith, which turns the consecrated ground into profane ground. In case you don't know, profane ground gives 1% flat added critical strike chance and minus 10% to all resistances to affected enemies. If you can't afford the Broken Faith early on, you can just leave it out. We're going to replace it soonish anyway. Xandathis' Cassock is powerful by itself. And for the Spectres, we are looking at the 2 Chieftains to enable charges on our minions, and the Primal Crush Claw, which you can get from blue plants in Harvest. For the mid-league, we want a Convoking Wand with +2 levels, some minion damage, and useful minion suffixes. And the way you make these is by rolling Convoking Wands eye level 76 to 82 with Bound, corroded, metallic, and shuddering fossils. And it's going to take you on average some 13 tries or so. If you want to roll a Convoking Wand, eye level 83 or higher, you're going to have to replace the Bound Fossil with a Jagged Fossil to exclude the now eligible added Chaos damage, which is a prefix. For our shield, we're going with Aegis Aurora for the elemental resistances, armor, energy shield, and of course the ES recovery on block. For the helmet, we want to go with one that has a fractured +2 level of minion skill gem modifier, and we're going to roll it with a deafening essences of loathing until we get a semi-usable outcome. And this will also serve as the basis for the endgame version of the helmet that we're going to make later on. For the implicits, we're looking for increased mana reservation efficiency and pretty much any Searing Exarch modifier that you want to use. For the chest, we're going with the Skin of the Loyal with the +2 level of socketed minion gem implicit. If you can't get that one, you could alternatively get yourself one with +2 level of socketed duration gems. It's a bit worse because it doesn't scale our minion damage support gem, but it's still fine. And of course, similar to Skin of the Lords, make sure to get one with the proper color combinations. The Triad Grip is pretty much unchanged. For the rest of the gear, we're looking for energy shield and resistances, and of course movement speed on the boots. And for the belt, I can heavily recommend Graven's Secret, optimally with a useful Corrupt implicit. And we're going with this belt because it gives us energy shield, maximum mana, lightning resistance, and it transforms our power charges into absorption charges. And these absorption charges give us energy shield recoup against elemental damage, which in combination with Divine Shield and CI lets us mitigate pretty much every type of damage as long as it is hit-based. For our cluster jewels, we want Feasting Fiends for Leech and Life from Death to prevent the cascade failure. So Life from Death gives our minions life recovery on minion death, thus preventing too many minions dying at once. For the large cluster jewel, we want increased passive effect, maximum energy shield, and minion attack and cast speed. You can either make them yourself or just buy them. In case you want to know how to make them, I made a video of this, and I'm going to leave the link to that video in the comments below. For our Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flash combo, we want Mastermind of Discord, because it increases the amount of resistances that are reduced by exposure. For the Ghastly Eye Jewels, we are looking for flat added physical damage, cold damage, and minion attack and cast speed, or minion damage if we used a minion skill recently. The Spectres are unchanged. And for our Guardian, we're looking for the Kingmaker, a Crown of the Tyrant with a green socket, in order to reduce enemy resistances and get our minions flat added cold damage. We're also looking for Gravebind, which will make nearby enemies killed count as killed by our Guardian, which is important for the chest, which has a Hunter-influenced modifier that allows our Guardian to regenerate 15% of its life over 1 second every 4 seconds. And a Crusader modifier that gives our Guardian a chance to explode enemies, which in combination with the last modifier on the Legacy of Fury will tremendously increase our clear speed. And the Legacy of Fury makes nearby enemies scorched with increased scorch effect. In case you don't know, scorch reduces elemental resistances, and the aforementioned last modifier gives our guardian a chance to burn enemies when it kills a scorched enemy. For the endgame version, we want a wand with a fractured minion damage modifier, optimally the incursion modifier that you can see here, which you would roll in a similar fashion to the earlier wand. But now we also want to roll the suffixes, which means you most likely have to use a Orb of Annul to try to remove one of the suffixes so you can craft on prefixes can't be changed, and then do Reforge Harvest to get the critical strike modifier. We also want to get our hands on a proper minion shield with plus level, minion damage, minion critical strike chance, and minion maximum elemental resistances. And I've also made a video on how to craft powerful minion shields similar to this one, and of course I'm going to leave the link to that video in the comments below. For our helmet, we're going to use the one shown earlier and roll it with deafening essences of loathing until we get decent suffixes, and then fix the prefixes with Eldritch Currency. After which we get the maximum tier mana reservation efficiency implicit, because we're going to need a lot of that to make the endgame version work. For our chest, we want a Skin of the Loyal with both the level 2 socketed minion gems and the level 2 socketed duration gem implicit. For the Triad Grip, we want one with the +2 level of socketed AoE and socketed aura gems. And you can fix the colors with either tainted chromatic orbs or the 3-socket crafting trick I showed earlier. Although you have to keep in mind that when using the crafting bench on a corrupted item, you have to pay an equal amount of Vaal orbs for every currency that is being used, which makes the tainted chromatic orb approach cheaper on average. For the boots, we're looking for a fractured movement speed, chance to avoid being chilled modifier. And we're going to roll this with a deafening essences of fear to get the minion max life modifier until we get decent suffixes, and then fix the prefixes with Eldritch Currency, similar to how we crafted the helmet. For the amulet, we're looking at a +2 level amulet. For the rings and the bell, we want flat maximum energy shield and percentage-based energy shield. And I made a video showcasing the crafting process, which I'm of course going to leave a link to in the comments below. For the flasks, we also want to get Bottled Faith. Keep in mind that the critical strike chance only applies to us, meaning it's actually not relevant for the roll. For the large cluster jewels, we now want one with 4 modifiers. Personally, I can't recommend going for the Vicious Bite, because the increase in damage is rather small, and you could get yourself 100 attributes or 100 resistances instead. For the Ghastly Eye Jewels, we're looking at flat added physical damage, flat added cold damage, minion attack and cast speed, and minion damage if we've used a minion skill recently. And we also want to start using a small cluster jewel with mana reservation efficiency, increased passive effect, and maximum energy shield, and some stats. We also want to use Impossible Escape, which allows us to allocate Charisma in addition to anointing Champion of the Cause. And we need all of this mana reservation efficiency because we want to fit our last aura, which is Vaal Haste. And Vaal Haste gives us increased damage, but even more importantly, increased movement speed, which helps our minions close the gap in boss fights and of course increases our clear speed. On our AG, we are looking for perfectly rolled Legacy of the Fury, if possible with the Regen Life enchantment from the lab, and for a better Guardian chest featuring 2 elevated modifiers. A chest with the elevated hunter modifier can sometimes bought for actually very little currency because it ends up being a side product in the production of hunter chests with different elevated modifiers. Most people simply can't make use of this one, which is of course good for us. The elevated Crusader modifier, however, is a different beast. You're probably going to have to make this yourself if you want the elevated modifier. You're going to have to get a chest, Crusader influenced, with the tier 1 explosion modifier and exactly 1 additional Crusader modifier, and then use an Orb of Dominance on it and pray that you elevate the right modifier. Now personally, I've made 3 of these last league and I can tell you they're definitely worth it, even though they're of course very expensive. But if you're using this on an anomalous Guardian, you're going to see essentially screen-wide explosions, meaning your clear speed will go through the roof. Now for our Spectres, we're going to be adding a Pale Seraphim for our last choice, but you could also just go with an Arena Master instead. For mapping, I like to use Aegis Aurora because the ES recovery on block makes you essentially immortal. And you can in theory use it for bosses, although you should understand that ES recovery on block isn't that powerful against bosses because you're taking few hits with very large amounts of damage, which kind of makes the recovery not that great. There's also the issue that it costs you a lot of damage, so it roughly costs you 20-something% of your damage, especially when comparing with a perfect minion shield. And we're also missing out on the maximum elemental resistances, making uber bossing, at least for your minions, much more dangerous. There's one more thing I haven't touched upon yet, and that is the Vaal version the gem will receive in 3.21. Vaal Animate Weapon animates between 5 and 13 weapons, depending on the gem level. Now, due to in-game limitations, we can only reach 12. And these weapons have more damage than the normal version and are animated as random uniques. Now, they might share a maximum number with the regular versions, but since the maximum number is scaling with the gem level as well, I have the feeling that they actually might have a maximum scaling of their own, meaning we get the Vaal animate weapons on top of the animate weapons we already have, which will result in a quite honestly obscene increase in damage. And even though the base duration is reduced to 15 seconds, I honestly have no idea what kind of boss is supposed to live through that. And last but not least, the skill-specific Crucible nodes have been leaked. The node for Animate Weapon gives it additional critical strike chance. Now this isn't confirmed yet, but either way, Animate Weapon looks like it's going to be the best minion in 3.21, or at least the best bosser. Personally, I gotta say, I'm hyped, and I will league start Animate Weapon, although as a physical version, I do think the other versions are more powerful, at least on League Start, but since it's the only one I haven't played, I kind of just want to have it for my collection, if you get my drift. And that's a wrap. As per usual, if you have questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comments below. And I hope you have an awesome League Start. So long, until next time.